If you're running a startup and you're trying to scale a business, this presentation is for you. Hey everyone, I'm Sean from My Three Rocks, and I have helped scale many companies, and I've seen a lot of challenges. What does it mean to scale your team from 10 employees to 500 employees? Well, if you go back a little bit, you had your garage days, you might still be in a garage or a co-working space. The business is chugging along and you're trying to figure things out, and then all of a sudden you hit some fundraising milestones, some customer milestones, and things start to pick up. Eventually you hit the adulting phase where you're hitting your stride, which many adults might not feel like that, but in theory, as you're running your business, you should feel like you're hitting your stride as an adult and you're making your income. So I heard this quote, I think it's attributed to Jeff Bezos. Every time your business tripled, something new broke. This has been the same pattern I've seen. Whether you're going from $1 million to $3 million in sales, or whether you're going from $100 to $300 million. Every time the business tripled, there was a new thing that got stressed to the point of breaking. When we think about a business, there are some key milestones. Right around the 15 employee range, you see that leadership really starts to matter. You can no longer be an individual contributor. If you were running business with consensus, that's not going to hold up well. It's going to start slowing down the company. Around 50 employees, you'll notice that you need managers to manage people. And that gets kind of weird too. And then you might even develop a second tier of management. 150 people, you might walk into an office and be like, whoa, who are you? I don't know you. Did I hire you? And then around 500 employees, you have some of the back-end systems that might need to be upgraded for scale. There's certain things that need to be working if you're going to start to scale a system. Product market fit must be going well. So that means that the product's great. Maybe we can move a little faster, but the product is fairly solid. Maybe there's like feedback from the customer. That's fine. Sales are moving in the right direction. There's some level of product velocity and sales velocity. And then fundraising. Sure, fundraising could be less time consuming, but overall, fundraising is going well. You're not in that fundraising trough. How do you know that things are starting to break and you start to see some resistance? I call it operational friction. And I see CEOs constantly battle with friction. So maybe you have complaints about the customer experience. Maybe you have people saying, hey, we need more structure here, or we need to have some consistency, or I'm having a hard time meeting people in the office. People are just way too busy. In these type of situations, there's a need for operations support in many different areas. So let's talk about some of those areas. I ask this all the time of leaders. What do you not have time for right now that if you had more resources you would do? This is a great opportunity for a chief of staff or a fractional person to come into the company to help you set those up. You might be struggling with sales, marketing, HR, customer experience. These are the things that people neglect. Some of the best intending leaders who are trying to be intentional about the culture might be making culture missteps as well. These are things that teams will struggle with as they start to scale. Let's take a look at sales and marketing. Maybe people are tracking customers through email. Maybe they're using spreadsheets or an Airtable. Whatever it is, there needs to be some level of tracking so you don't have two people talking to the same person. It's helpful to have pipeline reports. Maybe your board members are going to ask for different types of reports, and to go back and create those manually will take a lot of time and energy. This is around the time that founder-led sales might start to shift, and you could hire that first salesperson to build a repeatable sales system. This is also the time when we could start to look at product-led. This is also the time when product-led sales. Is your website and marketing doing the right thing? Is it building a company, or is it selling a product? In the HR world, things will break as well. No one is a natural pro at interviewing. Everyone thinks, oh, I need to ask this one question. Interviewing is something that you get better at with time. It's helpful to have mentors. It's helpful to read lots of books on this. Firing. So many CEOs I know are reluctant to fire, especially in those early days, because they feel a debt of gratitude to some of these early employees. Payroll and benefits. These are things that, yeah, of course, people want them, but we're building a business here, so these things get neglected. Applicant tracking systems are horrible for the most part, but they're such an essential part of a business at this stage. Titles, compensation, if you don't get a hold of this early, it could get off the rails and you could have a huge problem down the road when people start to compare, and they will compare. How much this person is getting compensated? How many shares did that person get? So the sooner you can start to standardize some of this, the better off you're going to be. There's a reluctance to hire great people, and that's because we're moving so quickly. And how do you develop that discernment to bring in A players? Because there's that saying, A players hire A players, B players hire C players. So you don't want that so early on. And then finally, KPIs and OKRs. How frequently should you do it? At different stages, what are the things that you should be tracking? Are you tracking too much, too little? The customer experience is another thing that tends to break fairly early on. We work so hard to bring in a customer, but are we creating the right expectations for customers? These are also things that we don't think about when building product. We don't often think about installation, repair, onboarding. We just think about getting the product into their hands, having them use it, having all the benefits accrue. People will adopt products in different ways. And so how do we make sure that customers ramp into the product in the way that you wish them to do? When they hit roadblocks, how are you supporting them through those problems? Are there ways to do self-service? Because customers are going to want to try to solve some of these problems on their own without having to deal with the friction of contacting your company. How do we make this really, really easy for the customer to go from purchase to use to benefit? If you're working with physical products, sometimes you might be making something and you might need to shift that from a make decision to a buy decision. So you'll start to work with contractors instead of co-founders wiring things together or boxing things in packages. And when you start to make those buy decisions, then you also have to establish a supply chain, you have to establish quality assurance, you have to worry about payment terms. So logistics and information systems become a lot more critical. On engineering and product, engineering ops and product ops start to break down. How are you planning sprints? Are you doing sprints every 3 days, every 7 days, every 14 days? There's a tension, a natural tension between who is working on new products versus who is sustaining existing products. And how do you manage engineering tickets that come through? Are you tracking features? Are you tracking changes? How are you building your experimentation system? We talked earlier about how your board will have different expectations. Number one thing that you should know is what is your cash flow situation. So if you don't have a system that's really tracking it and you're just looking at bank statements, that's not going to hold up over time when that person needs to make a big purchase for inventory or some annual contract. You need to be able to forecast sales. You need to be able to understand what your fundraising needs are, how much you're going to need at the next funding round and the funding round after, so that you can start to understand, okay, how do we parse out equity? How do we rebuild our cap table? How do we release shares to our employees? And through that, the right finance person will help to build a strategic narrative that fits with your vision of the company. I mentioned culture, and so many founders these days are thinking about culture, and it's fantastic. Thinking and talking about culture is different than doing culture. And occasionally, they would say one thing and do another thing, and that disconnect could destroy culture. They say that culture is described as the worst behavior tolerated. One of your jobs as a CEO is to manage these things, but do you have to do it yourself when you have everything else on your plate? Or could you hire someone to be the person who's tracking these things, who is able to call you out when you are stepping on the culture of the company? I mentioned consensus earlier. It's a great system for when you want to pull people together in the early days of building a company, but it really breaks down as you start to scale. And maybe a decision that you would have made as a company is no longer the case. So you start to shift towards silos and departments, and all of a sudden you have to communicate. Oh, we made that decision in this meeting. How do you communicate? How transparent of an organization are you going to be? How transparent are you going to be about your KPIs? How does communication flow down from leadership or from team to team? How much do you firewall different Slack channels? And if you have multiple offices, do you think that each office needs to have the same culture, or could these cultures form a little bit more organically? Are there key principles that you need to ensure across different Are there key principles that you need to ensure across different offices that might make each office feel a little bit different, but feel a little bit the same? Another thing that tends to happen is as you and the rest of the leadership team starts to step away from certain roles, are you overstepping? Is there role confusion? And that leads to leadership. Oftentimes, a CTO or a CEO or a COO, CPO is right for a company at one stage, and they might not scale at the next stage. I remember building a company, and a CFO at 100 employees did not scale to the CFO at 500. When we made that change, we were able to get to that next level, but then that CFO did not scale at 1,000 employees, and we had to change CFOs again and again until we found a CFO that was able to scale through multiple iterations. Some people are able to move through multiple triplings, and some people are not. It's not to say that a CEO can't go from the startup days to a 1,000-person company, but it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of coaching. It takes a strong team around you. It takes really good decision making and a lot of luck. One of the philosophies I have is that your title today is your title today, but it's not necessarily your title tomorrow. So you have to constantly interview for that next role. At the next funding round, let's say that you're doing $10 million in sales. Are you still going to be the CTO of this company when we're doing $100 million of sales? One thing that kills company and culture is, are we tolerating valuable underperformers? What do I mean by valuable? Well, maybe they're valuable because they're a best friend or a confidant. Maybe they're valuable because of something they brought in 2 years ago, or that there's this big thing on the horizon that they might be bringing in. We have to be mindful of, are we tolerating these people? Are we giving space for failure, or are they bringing down the company? And it's a hard decision to make, and that requires leadership. The last point here is, when you hire somebody in a high growth company, it's tempting to hire someone with a lot of experience. But in reality, you're going to want to hire someone that could scale with the organization. There's this framework of hire for slope, not y-intercept. Y-intercept being their skill level, their talent level is really impressive, but they might not grow beyond that. Versus hiring someone that might have a lower skill or capability level, but they will be able to grow. And typically in companies under 500 employees, you're going to want to hire more people with slope than y-intercept. How do we manage breakages? You could hire an expert. You could hire someone with a y-intercept, but typically you're going to have a high rejection rate. You could hire a junior person and train them, but this takes a lot of effort and energy. That said, typically that investment will pay off over the long run. You can promote from within, and that works until a person gets promoted beyond their capability. I think they call it the Peter Principle. You can outsource. So there's a lot of opportunity to say, hey, our company could focus on this, and there's other companies out there that focus on something else that we're doing internally. Maybe we should outsource. And then finally, hiring fractional is pretty powerful. I like to say that when I come into a company, I could take something that was good enough to get by to great. I could set up the infrastructure and the processes so that we can now hire somebody full-time in those functions. Once that function, let's take, for example, the finance department. Once it goes from good enough, where we're just getting by, to great, we have systems in place that we could hire someone who is world-class in the organization. They'll have a better chance of not being rejected by the company because you have a structure for them. They don't have to do a lot of the heavy lift, and they can focus on doing what they do best. One of the benefits of hiring a fractional is because you can get top-tier talent at a fraction of the price. You don't necessarily need to hire someone that costs $500,000, $1 million a year, but you can get that person's expertise. And they've seen so many things that they can help you avoid some very costly blind spots. Some of those blind spots might be a decision that you would have deliberated for hours, when an experienced person would just say, oh, yes, I know how to solve this problem. Here's what you need to do. Here's the software you need. Here's the system you need. Here's the person you need. It could be incredibly valuable, especially if you don't have that expertise and you don't want to have the risk of hiring an expert that will reject. It also lays the foundation for hiring someone later on, because that person won't have to do the heavy lift. They won't have to deliberate over all these little decisions, and they'll have a functioning department that they could build into a world-class department. So once again, I'm Sean, and if you want to get in touch with me, you can reach out in any of these ways. Thank you.